Motion passes 2019-11. So why don't we, before we have that motion read, go through just a quick summary again for new people here that weren't at the last meeting. Chief, if you want to step up here, you can sit or stand however you like and explain to the public what we are considering.
Okay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm John Wardlow. I'm the fire chief here in Chesterland. So, I don't know how far back we want to go, but fire department's coming to a point where we're going to be operating in a negative credit or balance in our accounts. So, the fire department has now gone 17 years without any new tax levies. So we're at a point where we're looking at what we can do to right our ship, I should say, for the fire service. So we're looking at the potential of a tax levy this coming year, which would be our first in 17 years. I feel pretty proud of that. I think we worked very hard to go 17 years, and I don't know of any business that's been able to make it 17 years without increasing their prices. The fire service, everything that we do is paid for by our fire levy money. So if we change a light bulb, that comes out of the fire levy money. If we repave the parking lot, which we did this year at an expense of over $30,000 because it was badly needed, those all come from the fire funds. So everything related to operating the fire and EMS service comes from the fire levy money. Fire service in general, and you could almost rebrand the fire service across the country and call us EMS and fire service, because about 80% of what most fire departments do, and that varies between 75 to 80%, don't hold me to 80, but are EMS calls. So, in reality, our fires have gone down, which is a great thing. That doesn't just happen by accident, though. That happens with very active fire inspection programs where we're inspecting businesses, with fire codes that are enforced for these businesses. We don't have sprinklers here in this community, nor do we have city water, so we have to be very diligent of enforcing the fire codes with our businesses, and our businesses work great with us in that respect. We staff our station now. I've been on the department going on 31 years. I started here as a volunteer. I have served in every position in this fire department, so I can speak with a lot of experience on the fire department. 30 years ago, we were a department made up of approximately 40 volunteer members. About 38, again, don't hold me to those numbers, lived in our community. And we didn't have people in the station. So when a call came in, we all carried pagers. We all jumped off our tractors or whatever we were doing at home, and we ran to the fire station, and we got the trucks, whether it was an ambulance, fire truck, and we went on a call. Huge amount of time transpired by the time you got to the fire station. So fires had the chance to build. A fire can double itself in about every minute that it burns. Today's fires burn even faster because of what we're seeing burn. You look at the Jogga Market House as an example. It's built out of timbers. Those are great things. You look at new houses now, they're built out of trusses that are built out of virgin lumber that burn fast. We have couches, we have all these carcinogens that burn in houses now that expose us to cyanide gases and things that will actually kill us, as opposed to old style. So we have to get to those fires quick. So over the years we've come to progress to the point where we're staffing our fire station. We get to fires now, and fortunately we don't have these huge dollar losses. We've kept our losses under $500,000 in Chesterland. I think that's fantastic because we don't have the houses that are burning down. We're able to get there and put it out while it's just a small, we call them room and contents fires. We keep the contents of the room and keep it to there. The houses can be rebuilt and saved. So the fire service has evolved to this point, but our activity level has increased as well. We're about the second busiest fire department in Jogga County. We're busier than any community that touches us. And so our call volume has gone up. The level of skill that you have to ask of a paramedic now is tenfold, if not more, than what we used to do. We used to treat people with what I say, treat them with the accelerator. We gave them very basic level of care, put them in an ambulance and ran for the hospital. Today's paramedics function with over 60 medications in their drug boxes. They function at a physician level care in a home, whether it's a child, an infant, a newborn, or a senior citizen. We're providing a level of care. Paramedics today have to do so much more than paramedics or EMTs in the old days. So we're spending a lot more time taking care of our patients, especially our seniors. That's the predominant number of people who use our services. So The level of care that we're providing has increased over those years. But in order to maintain that service, the reality of it is that our costs have gone up. Again, I'll go back to even our gasoline comes out of our budget that we pay for the trucks. That doesn't come out of the road or any other budget. The cost of a fire truck is over $500,000. We're stretching our fire trucks to 30 years in length. When I started, we would replace a squad in 7 years, 8 years. We're going to be at 17 years, or maybe 15 years on one of these squads now that we're replacing. So we've also dropped our equipment. We've taken out 4 pieces of apparatus that used to be part of our complement of equipment that we no longer have. That included 2 tankers and 2 engines. So we've reduced our amount of equipment that we carry in stations. We've increased our prices, or our prices have increased us. Our call volumes have gone up. So I hear a lot of people say, well, there's no more fires. Why do you need it? Because of the EMS side is truly one of the biggest things, and the level of care and what these paramedics provide. There's another portion of this which is not driven by anyone in this room. Yes, sir. That's okay.
Can you identify yourself for the record there, please?
Richard Perino.
Yes, sir.
I work across the street in Howard Hanna.
Okay.
I just had a quick question regarding, like, you're talking about vehicles. How many vehicles have to go to when you get an emergency?
It depends on the emergency, sir.
Just one?
Yeah, it really depends on the emergency. So I'll give you an example of a general medical call, which again is 80%. We send an ambulance with 2 people on that ambulance. They're usually 2 paramedics. Sometimes it's a basic EMT and a paramedic. Then we also have our shift officer following a pickup truck. So he provides the 3rd person on that call. And if you look at him as your middle level manager, he's managing the call. He's overseeing it. He's also in his mind going, what's the next call? What's the next call? I got to be ready for the next one, right? So he's preparing for what might happen next. So we send 3 on a general emergency medical call. Now if that call turns into something critical, let's say a cardiac arrest, and I can use, well, let's go back. We just had a gentleman who was pinned in the woods, who was pinned under a tree way back in the woods. It took everybody on staff, plus our 2 police officers, to get him out of the woods. He was, a pretty good sized guy. He was pinned under a tree with some severe injuries, life-threatening injuries. So it took the whole crew. So in that case, it took the ambulance, the truck that went with it, the pickup truck, another truck to bring our ATV, and there was some specialized equipment to get him out of the woods. There would have been no other way to bring him out. If we go to a car accident, we start with a squad and a fire truck. The fire truck serves a couple purposes. If you go to look at our Facebook page, our truck blocks for us. It provides safety for us. If we have to close a road down so that we can protect our personnel, that's its function. That may be one of its only functions at that call. It also has our extrication tool. So if somebody's in a car that we cannot easily get them out and we have to cut the car apart or pry a door open, that truck has that equipment on it. Then of course the ambulance. When we go to a fire call, because we don't have city water here, movement of water becomes very labor intensive. If you think of a city, they pull up to a hydrant, they hook up to a hydrant, they pull down the road, and they're ready to go. Now they're flowing, however, 1,000 gallons a minute, continuous water supply, that part's forgotten. With us, we have to bring a tanker truck, which is, I call it our mobile fire hydrant. That truck carries upwards of 3,000 gallons of water. So you have to have somebody to drive that truck. You have to have somebody to operate that pump on that truck. He can't leave that pump and walk away from it. You have an operator of the fire engine itself, the engine truck, which has all the hose lines and about 1,000 gallons of water. So there's 2 people committed to that. Then you have minimum of 2 to go in and fight a fire, and somebody to oversee the call. That person who oversees the call's job is to look out for the safety of those people inside of a call and to manage the incident as a whole. So it's really dependent on the call, and I kind of gave you the long answer. Did that kind of help a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. So, another question in the back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can handle the question if you want.
Do I have to make him state your name?
Yeah, please.
Mike Petrozello, Happy New Year's, everybody.
Happy New Year, Mike.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
You have 75 to 80% is EMS.
Yeah.
How many of those are critical and non-critical, would you estimate?
That's very subjective to what I would call critical and what someone else might call critical,
No,
but.
I'm talking about life-threatening, heart attack victims versus somebody that fell and broke a leg.
30%, 20 to 30%, Mike?
Are critical?
Yeah, and I'd have to really, and I'd be glad, and some of this, I apologize, you're gonna ask me questions, I may have to go back and get you answers. And let me preface all this by, my door is open anytime, if anybody wants to come and meet with me, I'll spend time at the fire station, I'll pull records for you, I'll get all these statistics that you'd like, but I may not have them all tonight. So a lot of times it's mitigating the call from becoming critical. So someone calls me for chest pains, we go there, we're able to give him medications that keep him from going into cardiac arrest. So we mitigate the call from becoming that life-threatening, he's in cardiac arrest, and probably has a very little survivability rate.
So do you have the statistics on those numbers?
Yeah, I can pull the types of EMS calls that they are and things like that, yeah.
And I guess on a follow-up, you talk about the tankers. How many times have the tankers been used in the last 2 years?
Basically, every time we go out on a fire call, the tankers
I
go.
mean, physically use the pump.
How many times are they pumped?
Yeah,
Well,
how
they
many
pump
times have
basically
you
at it
used-
every time we have a fire.
And that
They're
is how
hooked
many
up.
times in the last 2 years, roughly?
Well, just for this year, we've responded to what we call 34 fires, okay?
That was in 2018.
And again, I just came back in town, so I'm still doing my year-end summary, so I apologize, the numbers may vary a little bit, but that gets you in the ballpark.
It'd be interesting to hear how many times
Yeah.
you've used the tankers.
But, you know, if you look at the fire service, we're kind of an insurance policy. We're here for what might happen. If I could predict today, since midnight, we've run 8 calls. That's pretty much on level with a lot of cities. That's, in the days, it's only 6 o'clock, you know? 2 times of those today, we've had 2 calls at one time. So,
You
we
had
have to
8
bring the
calls today?
tanker. Pardon? Yeah,
You had
8
8 calls
Since midnight last
today?
night to right now, we've ran 8 calls. 2 different times, those were 2 calls at the same time. So, all of our personnel are out. So, just to the point of the tanker is, every time we go on a fire call, that truck rolls because we don't know what we're coming up against.
But
So,
of those 8 calls, how many lines are going to the hospital?
every one of them, everyone but one. One was a lift assist, an invalid who just needed to be lifted. The other 7 were transported to the hospital, yeah. So, is there, so,
Well, you know what, I think just at a high level conversation, we probably maybe just dim the light. Even without, we've looked at different scenarios and jump in and talk to them last time, instead of me, but we looked at remaining on the current with our staff, and I think one of the interesting points you brought up at the prior meeting was our staff, which is all part-time. When John, the chief warden, is out in the public, some people think it's an all-volunteer fire department, some people think we have full-time. So there's, I think, some education we need to do on how the fire department actually functions within Chester Township. But one of the interesting things when you're just looking at these numbers is even if we just remained as we are, the fire department is operating at a deficit, you can see between 20 and 2021 of about $600,000 a year. So that's about 1.6, 1.7 mils in and of itself without any changes. And in the last meeting, it seemed like the conversation was tending towards, so with 6 full-time firefighters, which is basically 2 firefighters per shift, so you're basically adding 2 full-time employees on a 24/7 basis, that's an additional cost of about $165,000, which is roughly a little bit less than a half of a mil. So trying to put some numbers into perspective, we have an operating shortfall, whether we made any changes or not. If we do make changes to staff up so that there are 2 full-time people per shift, that's an additional cost of a little bit less than a half of a mil. So, taking into account all of those factors, the conversation kind of evolved into 2.75 mils, and looking at hiring of the 6 full-time officers, and that gets us out to, under that approach, if the levy if the motion passes and we go through the process of putting it onto the ballot, then it's to 2028 or something like that, I think was the number, so almost 10 years.
can I speak to the full-time issues?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, I started to go on this and I got a little sidetracked. That when I said there's nothing that anybody here can affect, the fire service faces probably, I'll use it as comparison to like all the skilled craftsmen, your electricians, plumbers, all the skilled trades. The younger generation's not going into those trades as much. There's a shortage of firefighters nationwide, and I ask anybody to go talk to any fire chief I've sat in on the classes and the seminars, I've sat in on the podcasts that are coming from Texas and read articles from Colorado. I've inundated the board with articles. This is a national issue that there is a shortage of firemen in our country. So the cities, there's an example of Lyndhurst, Mayfield Heights, South Euclid, Pepper Pike, and it wasn't University Heights, I apologize, with Mayfield Heights. All very well paying, very good, solid, full-time departments. This year, for the first time, they gave one test for all 5 communities because there's not enough people for each one to give their own test. So all the cities are facing the same challenge of trying to find enough people to staff their departments. So what happens in that situation, I have taken personally tests with over 500 people for one community. People used to go and spend the night at a town hall, at a city hall to get an application because they only gave out, it's kind of like getting a concert ticket. You go there the night before because there's only so many, so you had to get your application, and if you didn't get your application, those days are over, folks. This is the industry, this is a reality of what it is today. There's not enough people out there. So what happens is when these cities hire a full-time person, guess where the vacuum's left? It's with us. It's with the part-time departments because as everybody should have a full-time job with benefits, with vacation. All these young people, that's what they're looking for, and they're getting them. So they're getting to fill these jobs, and it's leaving us with a vacuum. In the last 10 years, we've had almost 100% turnover in personnel. There's a huge cost with turnover of training, of, yes, some gear and things like that, some of that can be reused, uniforms. The costs that go into that turnover, forget about the continuity of an operation because now you're dealing with new people all the time. We don't have that luxury. We're left with the vacuum. So we're out there trying to struggle to pull people in here to work. We face some departments, we're on the edge of Cuyahoga County, as you all know, that pay very well. And that's what today's firemen, as they should for what they do, should be paid. The volunteer days are over. So the reality of the service is, there are jobs out there. These young men are getting those jobs as they should. We're left kind of with the vacuum to fill. And at the same time, our call volumes goes up. There is not a community that touches us that runs the call volume that we do. Yeah, Mr. Petrozello?
Mike Petrozello again. But our part-time firefighters are mostly EMS people.
They are all firefighter, paramedic, or we have 2 that are.
But they all have,
They're
90%
cross-trained.
of them have full-time jobs in other departments.
I don't know where you got 90%, but a good
I'm
percentage of them do. It used to be where most of them did not. They were struggling to find those jobs.
Yeah.
Those jobs, because of the drop program and other changes in the economy, have opened up now. So a lot of our firemen do have those jobs, which what that does is they were available for a huge amount of hours with us before. They've either gone away completely or their hours are very limited to what they can offer us.
How many part-timers do we currently have, John?
About 37 right now.
So we're down from last year.
Maybe down about 1 or 2. Yeah, it varies from, we have 2 in training right now.
I'm just throwing out an idea.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it make sense to contract out the fire service and just do EMS out of our facility?
Who would you contract the fire service
Well, I don't
to?
know, Munson outsources to Chardon. Couldn't we outsource to Russell?
Well, Russell is not a full-time staff department. They run half the calls we do. Munson is a private
I'm just
fire
talking about for
corporation.
I'm just talking about for fire.
Again, Munson's not a staff, Russell's not a staff department, so you would lose people in the station, you
Well,
know?
of the 34 fires calls you ran last year.
There was more than 34 calls. You asked me how many structure fires we had.
Of
That's
the
what I-
34 structure fires,
Mhm.
how many were actual fires that caused complete devastation?
10 or less? That's a good thing, though. That's why I go back to
Well, I
the
know,
fire
I-
inspection,
I-
so.
But actually, because one of the things, I mean, you have to, what you had mentioned earlier, talking about response time. And that's very important as far as minimizing the size of the fire. So if you were looking at staffing physically at Russell or physically at Munson and expecting them to respond to Chester, that would be putting, you know, all of the properties, commercial businesses and residential at greater risk. We just went through a lengthy and extensive process in regards to the ISO evaluation, which is, we were able to lower our number 1 point, which actually means we are less risk of a community, and that has a positive impact on how insurance companies look at us. So if we didn't have physical fire equipment and firefighters here in our township, I would expect that our home insurance rates and business rates would probably increase.
Yeah, yeah.
On a follow-up, has there been any more discussions about Fire Station 2, selling it for income?
That I think will probably be one of the talks of a goal for 2019 here. There was just, wanted to get through the ISO audit process, there was a transition to a new board of
Well,
trustees, so.
You know, I'm looking at a 2.7 mil, 2.75 mil levy. That's an additional $1 million. Just my, I mean, that's an additional,
No.
close to $1 million,
979.
Yeah.
That's 38%.
Yep.
right? Of
Yeah.
additional income to your current budget.
Correct.
And what are we collecting currently on the fire department right now?
About 1.045 million.
No, I think that's what we pay in salary right now. Isn't that?
1 point,
If we just did that.
Because what you're asking for is really doubling, if it's 1.4 million,
yeah, one thing to think
we're
of.
almost doubling the income for the fire department.
Yeah. True, but we've also been, we've been reducing carryover over time, and if you look at between year 2020 and 2021, that's essentially a $600,000 hole. We're plugging that hole with EMS funds, which cannot sustain in the long term, transferring or, paying payroll out of EMS is a short-term fix to a problem that we have, which is incumbent upon us to inform the residents. So you're looking at $600,000 deficit right now, operating deficit, so that's
That's annually?
correct.
And where have we been making it up from right now? The EMS account?
Well, that'll be this year, we're transferring the lieutenants and the chief over into the EMS account. We haven't had to do that because we have had sufficient carryover, and as the chief said, it's been 17 years since any new additional revenues came into the township from levy dollars.
So how much is that that's gonna be the shortfall money, 600,000?
Correct.
You're saying
Well,
you need 600,000 a year.
569, yeah.
You're saying you need 600,000 a year, but you're asking for $1 million.
Well, if you look at the cost of, you obviously, 80% of the cost is related to employees and labor side of things. Those are essentially, when you look at contracts, as you know as a former trustee, essentially there are incremental increases over time, so you have to account for those, and that's why we're looking at projecting out where Mr. Richter went through a 10 or plus year projection just to see where, as we adjusted levy dollars, where we end up at and trying to go forward as long as we can. So 2.75 mils, as that takes us out to 2028, so 9 years on that, on the current estimated operating expenses.
But that doesn't add up, because you're asking for $1 million a year. Over 9 years, that's $9 million. So, I mean, if you're only 600,000 short, why are you asking for $1 million when you really only need 600? Because that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, well, if you're, because one of the,
out for EMS.
yeah, there's $165,000 related to going to 6 full-time people as well.
So what are you gonna do with the EMS money? Just let it keep on growing?
So we used that for replacement, as you know, of the EMS squads,
Yeah, we
just I think
did that.
2 years ago.
Right.
There's another squad due in 2 years, I believe, an engine in another 6 years.
So that engine and squad in those years would be about 650,000 for those services.
And we're collecting how much annually average from EMS?
Get about 220.
That's something that's been in
Like
place
6 years, we'll
for,
have 1
so
point.
that's approximately $2 million, I think, roughly of
I'm
non-levy.
just looking at it from a mathematical standpoint.
Hmm?
In 6 years, at $200,000, you have 1.2 million. That's more than enough to buy a new vehicle, if you don't touch it. So I'm just trying to figure in my little mind why
Well,
we're asking for $1 million.
$430,000 of the current carryover, which is about $500,000, is going to pay for salaries for 2019.
I understand it, but over the next 6 years, you're gonna collect 1.2 million from the EMS
Mhm.
accounts.
So between a squad,
So
the
why-
chief,
That's more than enough to buy the new fire truck and buy the squad. So I'm still trying to figure out why we need an additional $1 million a year over that same time period, when you have that revenue coming in the EMS account.
I guess the suggestion I would make is maybe to sit down with the chief and walk through each of these numbers and look at it to help understand, because it's kind of a complex scenario.
Well, nothing to understand, if you're collecting, and I'm on the low side of that, $200,000 in EMS money, 6 years, you're gonna have 1.2 million.
Mhm.
But in 6 years, you're asking for 6 million on top of that.
But you're not, because you have expenses every year from the EMS account. That's-
And that's why I think it's important to look at the charts, to look at the table in the year over year, so that you can see what the costs are projected to be and how that works out. I understand your high-level commentary that, yeah, we're bringing in $1 million. If we're at a shortfall, and you can see, if you go back to the 2111, if you would, Mr. Richter, the 6 full-time. If you look at the first year that those levy dollars are collected, and then the next year, our carryover goes up. So for a number of years, our carryover goes up, and then it eventually starts to go back down just because of incremental increasing costs associated with employment and stuff like that.
That's without the levy money, but you're asking for $1 million.
No, that's with the levy money.
With the new $1 million levy money?
Yes.
We're also dropping the 80,000 a year, so over that time frame.
So you're still, even if you take the $1 million levy money, you're still gonna be taking from the EMS account for
No,
operating expenses?
no. For
in the
2019,
First year right now.
for 2019, we're taking like $430,000 out of the EMS account,
What's in that account right now?
about 520,000 or 550. So, at the end of,
At the end of 6 years.
about 510,000 is projection at the start of this year.
But at the end of 6 years, Mr. Rankin, you're gonna have 1.2, because you won't be touching an EMS account anymore.
Well, and
Until you
this is
buy
where I
capital
think it's
equipment.
important if you look at all of these other additional line item costs that are associated within there. Medical, furniture, equipment, a lot of the
Well,
regular
that's already in your
routine.
budget now,
Yes, and that's why it's showing the deficit after you go out that far.
but after you get the million, you're not gonna have that deficit anymore.
Correct, until the projection is 2028. But a lot of stuff, you're combining two conversations here. One, you were talking about the EMS account. And when you say $200,000 a year for 6 years, that's $1.2 million. I agree. There's $650,000 in an engine in a squad and $215,000 in a squad in the chief's car. So that's right there, that's $865,000. So you say, okay, of the $1.2 million, $865,000, if the future boards take actions, would be spent on that. Now you also, what's important is to look at all of these other incidental costs, and if you want to slide over to, so you can see the account numbers.
But what you're saying, Mr. Racky, is you need an additional $1 million a year with this levy to continue to operate as we currently are.
No, that would be with,
Why do you need the $1 million a year then?
that would be with the 6 full-time officers, and as Chief Wardrillin went through that process, the dynamics of how things are changing, availability of personnel, the level of training that's involved, the response times, it's a lot, all those factors that he went through that you were here to listen to, I don't want to repeat right now.
Okay.
Those are factors that you take into consideration. Ultimately, it's going to be, if this motion passes to go forward with the certificate of need, and then at the next meeting, if the motion passes to put it on the board of elections, it's going to be rest with the residents to make that decision as it should be. So, you know, I don't think anybody is not a pleasant process to have to go through this. You know, we went through when you were serving, Mr. Petrozello, for the road department. We went through the levy analysis and the process and the projections, and it's, it's not fun. It's incumbent upon us to educate the public and let them know the reasons and let them be informed and make their own decisions. Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir. Mr. Claypool.
Skip Claypool, Chesterland. Sorry, I have a little hard time reading your spreadsheet over here.
Yep.
So I'm speaking out of a deficit relative to maybe some of the facts, but I've not seen a case that lays out and shows both sides of the ledger, because there's always two sides of the ledger. There's the revenue side and there's the expense side. And so I've not seen where we've been managing the expense side necessarily, and I've not heard the case yet that solidifies for me why additional monies are needed. I mean, the township takes in X amount of dollars levy-wise across the board. I mean, you had a certain income. and certain amount, and as a taxpayer, I don't give a crap what you call that tax dollars, I'm paying you tax dollars. And so you have to manage all of those tax dollars to effectively deliver the services that we're delivering. And so, how much money's coming in, how much money is usable by, if we need it for the fire department, and why? You know, are we buying another fire truck? Okay, justify the fire truck. Of those 34 calls we took last year, how many of those were Chesterland specific calls? Are we doing this out of our township? Because
Yeah,
we're also
mutual aid
called on to
responses.
mutual aid, okay? And so, and how many of those were, you know,
Well, I'm sure the chief could get you that information if that helps you make, a
Yeah, I
decision
mean,
for yourself.
The point that I wanna make here is, I don't wanna bother John and go in there and sit for hours in his office and just benefit me. John and the trustees, you guys, need to put a case together that you can make publicly available, a packet that gives all the bullet points, all the financial numbers, not high-level numbers that are rolled up, but the specific detailed numbers so that we can effectively be educated and know whether or not we should support this or fight you or whatever the
I think-
case happens to
I
be.
think that'd be very easy to do, we have it,
And
we
so,
can pull it out, and
Right.
like you're saying, make it something to
I
distribute.
mean,
to the
I can do it,
residents.
Mike can do it, Dal can do it, I'm sure John doesn't wanna go through this 2 times. You gotta be able to do it one
If
time.
that's what's necessary
And
to educate the public so they can make an informed decision, I think you'd have to do that. You make a good point about that. We have talked about that already, about making sure that we do the public outreach, but that's really a function, I'll say, of the political action committee that would be in support of the levy, because as you know, the board of trustees can't, they can only put something onto the ballot. We can't, as a board, be promoting or opposing something. But essentially, if the motion passes, you can tell
Well,
where we
you are in
stand.
essence supporting it if you pass a
Correct.
motion to put it on the levy. I mean, it's your job to determine whether a
Yep.
levy is necessary. And if you feel it's necessary, then you vote to put it on the
Correct.
ballot. So in essence, you are saying it's necessary.
Mhm.
Well, hopefully you guys have thought through this enough to know that it is necessary.
Yeah.
And so we're not all going through a wasted exercise. So I mean, I don't wanna take shots at it, because I'm ignorant on a lot of the facts here.
Mr. Richter, I'm sure we'll send you this entire package here, which would help you have a substantive conversation with the chief on there too. I said, I go through a couple of thought processes, no changes, we're still at roughly 1.5, 1.6 mil deficit, operating deficit on salaries for the fire department. So money at that level is necessary just to continue operations, because EMS cannot support the fire department past 2019. So there's that as a base minimum. So I go through the process of looking at things and trying to eliminate, so that's an absolute cost that we need, unless the public, by their vote says, instead of staffing with 5 people, we're going to staff with 4 people. And let's say that no levies ever passed again, we might be going down to 3 people, or just to call-ins. So your level of service that the residents want or expect has to be defined, and then we say this is what the cost is to meet that level of service.
Well, keep in mind, I'm an old fart, and I just lost my job. And so, and I'm gonna be living on a fixed income, it's gonna be tight. And so, every time you put a levy on, it's making it harder and harder for me to live here in Chesterland. Think about all the other old farts like myself, who are on a fixed income. Every time we raise a levy, we did it for the road, and we transferred money out of the roads into the operating budget. I question whether that was really a necessary thing to do.
Don't go
The
off on a
library
tangent.
just did a levy. Every time, the Department of Aging, go on after. Pretty soon, those nickels add up to dollars, add up to real money, and then you're gonna be talking about all the old parts that live in Jog County not being able to live here anymore. We have to be sensitive to the taxpayers and make sure that when we're doing things, we're doing them rationally and it's actually needed. And, that's the only challenge I would issue to you, coming out of the
Yeah.
position that I was in. We worked really hard to make sure that we were being responsible with our citizens' tax dollars, and we didn't raise any taxes on our citizens the whole 4 years that I was there. And so, I'm gonna ask the same favor of you guys. Look at this very, very carefully, because you are really impacting those people with a fixed income that aren't gonna be able to survive too many more of these levies.
In reality, those are the people who use our service the most. The demographics are the 55 and older age.
Right.
They need us the most and can afford us the least. I mean, that's very true.
So,
You're right with that, John.
Not to get off tangent, but you went through the difficult process of making an assessment about whether the county should be doing new buildings or not. And if at a $45 million cost, I could say, well, why don't you just spend $1 million a year for the next 40 years continuing with those existing buildings? It's not a clear-cut solution, answer to this process.
No, but I could show you my case. I got a spreadsheet and a specific detailed case.
You'll be
You wanna see
receiving
it?
this from Mr. Richter by the time you get home this
I
evening.
can show you the case.
So, understood.
So that's all I ask here.
Yeah, no.
Create a case so that John can effectively lay out a very logical, clear cut, we're gonna need this and we need a little extra because of X, Y, and Z, whatever.
Exit to-
That way you're gonna save John a lot of time, you're gonna save yourselves a lot of time and a lot of grief.
To John's defense, he has done that, we've had, this will be the third discussion publicly about this levy. And
Each of us has met with him privately as individual trustees on multiple occasions to go through that process. I've made my personal and private challenges to him as well on various things. Yes, sir, Mr.
Mike
Petrozello.
Petrozello again. Right now, we have union contracts for part-time employees. Has anybody looked at the impact of full-time employee contracts and what they're gonna be looking for? Because I'm sure those two contracts are gonna be different.
Well, there's been some, you want to answer it or you want?
Well, yeah, to your point, yeah, so there is a part there, the firefighters are a collective bargaining
Right.
unit as part-timers.
Right.
I can't speak for them, but most firemen in this part of the world are unionized. So to think that they wouldn't unionize would be more surprising to me than they would. So I would anticipate that they probably would, but I couldn't speak for them. And they would be a separate bargaining unit than the part-time union.
Yeah, but would they be affiliated with the federal fire department?
The international, that would be up to them. That would totally be up to them.
Because that sets a whole new standard for pay scales, just so you know.
Oh, I know, I've been through multiple collective bargaining sessions. I'm the one who tried to stop the union and was slammed with
Well, I mean, you know that
unfair
is-
labor practice and was drugged through the papers by our little local paper that people
I
put
know,
out. So
I know.
I'm very well aware of that.
But you're gonna have to deal with two unions.
Oh, yeah. And that's true in a lot of places, they have their part-time union and the full-time union.
It changes the dynamic.
Well, yeah, because one is
management's-
looking for health care and benefits and things like that. The other's looking strictly at a wage because none of that
I mean,
is
and
part of
those
the
things
agreement.
have to be, I think those things have to be considered in your decision.
I think
'Cause
they are.
I'm hearing you wanna hire full-time fire people. I don't have a problem with that, but because you might be opening up Pandora's box, because before you know it, you might have 40 full-time firefighters. And a whole
Well, no, so in a
different-
contract, they can, let me speak to that. They can try to put in minimum manning clauses. I've seen that happen. You just don't put that in the contract. They cannot force you to put a minimum manning clause in your contract.
Sometimes you may not have a choice.
No.
It's management's rights,
Yeah.
and that was one of
Yeah,
the things I was
staffing
gonna
is
say.
management's right.
If we decided 6 full-time and the voters supported that and we offered $20,000 annual salary, very unlikely we're gonna get people. So we're gonna find out where the market, and the chief has a good idea where that is as far
Are
as.
these 6 employees gonna be 24 on, 40
So, yeah, I was
off?
just gonna speak to that. You're a little step ahead of me. So when we say 6, that's 2 per 24-hour shift. So that's still less than 50% of the staffing is full-time. So firefighters work on a 24-hour on, 48-hour off schedule, okay?
So how
They
many
can-
part-timers are you gonna be able to do?
So we'd eliminate 2 part-time positions and fill those with full-time. We're not increasing staffing, there's still gonna be 5 on, would be the plan. 2 of them would now be full-time. And the challenge that I run into is, when you have full-time employees, you can make them come to work, you can mandate employees into work. You cannot mandate a part-timer into work. I've worked many holidays in the last couple of years to cover those open shifts, because when you're full-time, and we experience it here, their full-time departments mandate them in. Just yesterday, I had a full-timer mandated into work. If nobody wants to come in and fill the shift, we're left with an open shift. So that's a challenge with part-timers. Doesn't matter what you pay them, if they don't want to come into work, they don't have to come into work. We do have minimum contract requirements, they have to work so many shifts a month, but that still leaves some that they may or may not want to fill.
These 6 employees, if you were to put on 6, are these all lieutenant grade above?
My plan would be 1 lieutenant and 1 blue shirt per shift. When I say blue shirt, not officer. So there would be 1 officer per shift, so 3 lieutenants and 3 non-lieutenants would be the goal to hire.
Okay.
have-
Yes, sir.
I have
Name,
one
please?
more question. Rich Perino with.
That's fine,
Yeah,
just one for the.
So you were talking about 34 calls, so how many were mutual aid?
I'd have to pull those statistics, I don't have that.
And then another, because it sounds, 34 doesn't sound like a lot, but how many times did you as West Jaga do mutual aid to surrounding
So
communities.
to talk about that,
Is that more?
it's what's called mutual aid and auto aid, okay, two different beasts. So in our total call volume, we ran 1,337 calls last year, okay? 80% being EMS. Us and Munson and Russell have automatic aid agreements, so specific types of calls, we go automatic aid and they come and they reciprocate. Mutual aid is a different beast, that's a whole different beast, that's usually a working fire, and you're calling in a lot of other communities beyond the two. So we have auto aid agreements with Munson and Russell, and I could get the numbers, how many times we went on auto aid and how many times we received auto aid. We receive auto aid more than we go, because just by call volume, we have more calls in both of those communities. So I could be glad to get those numbers, but that's kind of how it's set up. When
So
Russell
like
has,
if we were to say, get rid of the fire department, like you said, be an independent or contracted out, you would lose that, we'd lose that capability then of getting mutual aid. I mean, that would be
In
a
theory,
problem,
yeah.
wouldn't it?
yeah, there wouldn't be
The
that.
MOU that have to be
Well,
executed.
it's all mutual aid that way. Yeah, you wouldn't have mutual aid because you don't have anything in.
You don't have anything to offer, so.
I think, and that would put it, I mean,
The joint fire districts you could put together.
that would put a strain on everybody.
Dim your eyes for a second as we put the lights back on, if you would, please.
Wow.
Anything else from the residents at all, questions? Okay. 2019-11, move to approve a certificate of need to be submitted to the Geauga County Auditor's Office for the purpose of providing and maintaining fire apparatus, appliances, buildings, or sites therefore, or sources of water supply, and materials therefore, the establishment and maintenance of lines of fire alarm, telegraph, for the payment of firefighting companies or permanent, part-time, or volunteer firefighting, emergency medical service, administrative, or communications personnel to operate the same, including the payment of any employer contributions required for such personnel under section 145.48 or 742.34 of the revised code, or the purchase of ambulance equipment or the provision of ambulance, paramedic, or other emergency medical services operated by a fire department or firefighting company pursuant to section 5705.19, I think that's I, maybe L, at a rate not exceeding 2.75 mils, which is 27.5 cents for each $100 of valuation for 5 years, which levy is a new levy of 2.75 mils. Roll call, please.
Mr. Rogish?
Yes.
Mr. Radke?
Yes,
Mr. Mazurko's absent, motion passes.
thank you.